Hello, and welcome back to the Diogenes Podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Willingham, and together we will chew our way through Wokistan in search of an honest man, or woman, or they, them. I'm just kidding. There's nothing honest about any of that. Remember, if you enjoy the content on the Diogenes Podcast, please subscribe and tell your friends to join the pack. Also, remember to leave a like so that we can boost the channel and reach more viewers. Today, we'll continue with my essay in progress, Danse Macabre. This section is entitled Part 3, The Lonesome Death of Iryna Zarutska. And I cried, "Sister, hey sister, raise my bloody head. It's so lonesome to be dead, to be dead." Richie Havens, The Klan. On August 22nd, 2025, Iryna Zarutska, a 23-year-old Ukrainian refugee, was returning home from work on a light rail in Charlotte, North Carolina, when she was savagely murdered in an unprovoked knife attack from behind. Several bystanders within arm's reach did nothing. No cries of warning, no intervention, no aid or comfort offered. The killer strolled away down the train car, trailing the blood of an innocent young woman. This horrific and ruthless execution was captured on CCTV, and the optics are damning. A frail, beautiful young white woman minding her own business was suddenly stabbed violently in the neck by a much larger black man, a cowled, predatory thug who loomed up behind her and efficiently took her life with extreme prejudice. Iryna Zarutska looked up in abject terror and disbelief, clutched at her wounds, and began to sob, knowing she was dying. Within seconds, she slumped to the floor and bled out, while those seated nearby actually turned away from her, and her executioner casually walked away, dripping from the kill. The maniac, DeCarlos Brown, can be heard in the footage muttering, "I got that white girl. I got that white girl." Yet from the news media, nothing was heard for almost 2 weeks until leaked footage prompted the official release of the story. At this point, the color-coded sympathies and two-tier reporting of leftist media were on full display, as expressed by CNN's Abby Phillip, who is black. Quote, "People are murdered every single day in every city in America, and every single one of those murders is terrible and a tragedy. But this particular one, I'm trying to understand why this has become such a flashpoint on the right." End quote. This is dripping with bias. It minimizes an especially senseless and horrific murder as being indistinguishable from countless others. It ignores the obvious racial element in both the crime and its coverage, and it treats concern for Iryna Zarutska as somehow conservative, which is code for morally reprehensible. And by the way, I may be morally reprehensible, but I'm not a conservative. Why would this be? I submit that it is because what matters most to woke media is the morality play of systemic racism, not the reality of black-on-white crime. The left only really care about the victim if she is ideologically serviceable for the social justice narrative. Unfortunately for them, reality does not support the race hustle. According to data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, in 2021, 87% of non-lethal interracial violent crimes were black on white. In 2016, data showed black offenders committed homicide at 8 times the combined rate of whites and Hispanics. In that same year in New York City, blacks, who constituted 23% of the population, were responsible for 75% of all shootings and 70% of all robberies. This propensity for violence and homicide by blacks does not affect just white or other victims. According to the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, blacks between the ages of 10 to 34 die of homicide at 13 times the rate of whites. This is black-on-black crime, and no one is doing a thing about it. Why? Because this fact, too, fails to support the social justice narrative, and blacks themselves are the victims of an ideology hell-bent on saving them from everyone and everything except themselves. That's what I call systemic racism. As for covering such crimes, data show that black victims of police shootings receive 21 times the coverage of white victims, despite more whites being shot by cops, and the race of white shooters of black victims are 7 times as likely to be mentioned in news reports as black perpetrators murdering whites. At a press conference, the black female Democratic mayor of Charlotte, Vi Lyles, did not issue a statement condemning the killing of Iryna Zarutska, did not attempt to explain how the brutal, unprovoked murder of an innocent young woman by a deranged felon with 14 prior convictions might have been prevented, nor did she address the pervasive, statistically objective problem of black-on-white crime. Instead, she denounced the people who shared the ghastly footage of the incident on social media. In her statement, Mayor Lyles began by saying, quote, "The video of the heartbreaking attack that took Iryna Zarutska's life is now public. I want to thank our media department and community members who have chosen not to repost or share the footage," end quote. Mayor Lyles led by expressing a need for concealment. It seems clear that this was not out of respect for Iryna Zarutska's family, but to avoid contaminating the narrative of pervasive black victimhood. Consider that footage of George Floyd's death went viral within days of the event, and coverage of the international uprising that ensued lasted for years. The young woman who initially shared the video was awarded an honorary Pulitzer Prize for her quote-unquote courage, which, quote, "spurred protests against police brutality around the world," end quote. She also received $15,000 for loosing the fateful lightning of the terrible swift sword of social justice. Never mind the fact that Floyd was a career criminal, refused multiple times to comply with police, was placed in illegal restraint, had overdose levels of multiple drugs in his system, and was complaining of respiratory depression, a fatal side effect of one of those drugs, long before being restrained, and continued to resist until he died. Never mind the fact that Tony Timpa, a white man, died 4 years before Floyd under the same restraint after calling the police on himself during a manic episode. And unlike the Floyd case, the officers who definitely killed Timpa were not prosecuted and continued to work, and the event was barely reported and soon forgotten. George Floyd's family received $27 million, and a criminal was canonized, buried in a large gold casket with great ceremony, with streets and grants established in his honor, murals appearing from Minneapolis to Berlin to Nairobi, and sections of several American cities disestablished in his name. Never mind the fact that Jussie Smollett received months of news coverage for claiming he was the victim of a preposterous attack by imaginary white MAGA assailants. The media and the public fell all over themselves in performative outrage because of the narrative served. A gay black male showed up as himself at 2 a.m. on a Chicago street in sub-zero temperatures while he was out for a snack, only to be attacked by rabid white supremacists with a rope, a can of gas, and a pocket full of ethnic and homophobic slurs, just waiting for him to come along so they could proceed with the ethnic purification of our once great nation. Never mind the fact that Axel Rudakubana savagely murdered 3 young girls ages 6, 7, and 9 at a dance class in Southport, England in July 2024, stabbing the youngest 122 times while trying to decapitate her. He attempted to murder 10 others, stabbing 2 adults in the process. Never mind the fact that this monster, like DeCarlos Brown, was well known to authorities for years and had previously taken a knife to school and researched school shootings and had long been on a terrorist watch list and had prior convictions for possession of an al-Qaeda manual and the production of ricin. Never mind the fact that after his abominable crimes, he was recorded saying, "I'm glad those kids are dead. It makes me happy." Huzzah! He got those white girls. Never mind the fact that on April 2nd, 2025, 17-year-old Austin Metcalf was stabbed in the heart by Carmelo Anthony, who just happened to be carrying a big-ass knife to a track meet, for telling Anthony he was in the wrong reserved seating section. Austin Metcalf died in his twin brother's arms while Mr. Dark Karma, soon apprehended by police, asked politely if he could claim the unprovoked murder was self-defense. The very next day, in a public statement bizarrely absent visible grief, Austin Metcalf's father robotically apologized for racism, and a Give Send Go was established, which has raised over $500,000 for the legal defense of a red-handed homicidal thug. Iryna Zarutska's father remains in the Ukraine, where martial law rendered him unable to attend his daughter's funeral. Meanwhile, Carmelo Anthony's family camps in a $900,000 home with new cars in the driveway. Most especially never mind that the artifacts of fatuous and fallacious race baiting, like the 1619 Project, the Smithsonian Whiteness Chart, and Black Lives Matter, are to leftists more morally urgent than a young white woman dying, hideously murdered in a feral, unprovoked attack by a recidivist criminal surrounded by people of color who did nothing. Nothing for Iryna Zarutska, that is. But their community did cause $2.4 billion worth of property damage to several American cities and kill a couple of dozen people for one of their own criminals. You don't have to live like a refugee, but I guess sometimes you may have to DEI like one. Yes, I know that's misspelled, but that's AAVE for you. A Daniel penny for your thoughts, dear readers and listeners. In case you're having trouble connecting the little black dots, we have the new viral anthem from Mona Leo, released just a few weeks after the murder of Iryna Zarutska. Lit bitch, I could get you touched in an instant. If you ain't black, stay the fuck out to business. Bow. All the non-blacks to the back. Ugh. All the non-blacks to the back. Hold on. Damn. All the non-blacks to the back. Huh? All the non-blacks to the back. N-word. Mona Leo, Sexy Sulon, September 2025. The song is about a neighborhood block party, aka shooting gallery, where if you ain't black, then you can't say N-word. I enforce that. You're not invited to the cookout, but you can watch from the middle of the streets, be the lookout. The singer lets us know exactly what she thinks of the melanotically challenged. Bitches talking in a circle, bunch of rigmarole. I ain't shaking white hands, I watch them dig in they hole. And most importantly, she tells us what really needs to happen. I need my reparations, bitch. You gotta bring me my shit. Which she will undoubtedly spend wisely on self-improvement and in other socially productive causes. It just doesn't get any more black and white than this. Mayor Lyle spent more time trying to defend the rights of the homeless and the mentally ill than she did in any show of compassion for the real victim. A strategy sufficiently effective that a GoFundMe was established for DeCarlos Brown, just as it was for Carmelo Anthony. This was quickly taken down, but not as quickly or as incomprehensibly as Iryna Zarutska. And a final never mind. On September 26, 2025, ICE officials arrested criminal illegal alien Ian Andre Roberts, a black man from Guyana. Speeding away and later abandoning his vehicle after being identified by Iowa State Patrol officers, Roberts was soon found cowering in the bushes, and a loaded handgun, a fixed-blade hunting knife, and $3,000 in cash were found in his car. So far, ho-hum, another typical bust for one of the usual suspects. What makes it interesting is that Roberts was superintendent of schools in Iowa's largest school district, a position he held for over 2 years with a salary of over $286,000 per year. He fraudulently claimed to have completed 2 graduate programs in business and management, one at Georgetown and one at MIT, which clearly were not confirmed before his hiring. Roberts' record is a veritable carousel of felonies and illegal border crossings and includes possession of narcotics with intent to distribute, possession of forgery instruments, reckless driving, and several weapons charges. He was in the U.S. illegally for over 14 years before somehow obtaining a work visa in 2018, which expired in 2024, leading to his recent arrest. Immediately after Roberts' arrest, Des Moines School Board Chair Jackie Norris called for quote-unquote radical empathy. Whether for Roberts or the board is not quite clear. Norris followed up on the question by denying being privy to any information about Roberts' citizenship that would have precluded his hiring. You don't need to see his identification. These aren't the droids you're looking for. He can go about his business. Move along. The farce can have a strong influence on the weak-minded. Help me, Obama-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope. The term radical empathy was coined by, wait for it, female entrepreneur and quote-unquote renowned political scientist Terry Givens of McGill University in 2021 in her eponymous book, Radical Empathy, Finding a Path to Bridging Racial Divides. More like finding a path to abridging common sense. The book treats of all things Floydian and Covidian, and how bad things happen disproportionately to black people, which is double plus ungood, unlike George Floyd, who was slender and well-behaved. She argues that traditional empathy is just not good enough to solve for the outsized problems faced by the marginalized, and it is necessary to move beyond passivity and actively dismantle the systemic biases that keep minorities oppressed. Givens claims this starts by immersing oneself in others' stories. Apparently, she's unfamiliar with the work of her colleague and McGill alum, the respected psychologist Paul Bloom, who in his book, Against Empathy, cautioned, quote, "Empathy distorts our moral judgments in pretty much the same way that prejudice does," end quote. This is known as my-side bias. As for immersing oneself in others' stories, writer Jonathan Gottschall in The Story Paradox reminds us that radical skepticism may in fact be more humane than radical empathy. Quote, "Monsters behave like monsters all the time, but to get good people to behave monstrously, you must first tell them a story, a big lie, a dark conspiracy, an all-encompassing political or religious mythology," end quote. Yes. And Gottschall offers the example of the 1994 Rwandan genocide, in which Hutus slaughtered Tutsi hand-to-hand, door-to-door, at the rate of 333 per hour, leading to some 800,000 people butchered in a single month. This was made possible in part by years of hate cultivated by dehumanizing fictions and propaganda in periodicals and radio broadcasts, referring to Tutsi as cockroaches and vermin. This is precisely the kind of, quote, magical fiction that turns a bad thing, like hacking hundreds of Tutsi to death as they cry out for mercy in a church, into a good thing, end quote. And like calling conservatives or anti-woke liberals fascists, Nazis, and white supremacists when they hold open conversations on a college campus. More on the hateful, homicidal fables of the left to come. Mercifully, the Des Moines School Board only asked for radical empathy for a criminal alien forger and drug dealer with vehicular and dangerous weapons charges who lied about his academic credentials to get a very high-paying job overseeing children's education. More darkly, radical empathy is what led people to contribute large sums of money to support deranged killers like Carmelo Anthony and DeCarlos Brown. Let that sink in, dear readers and listeners. Sink in like a knife in the neck. Because that's what Judge Teresa Stokes did when she practiced radical empathy and freed DeCarlos Brown after his 14th conviction with no bail, just a promise to return to court, months before he executed Iryna Zarutska. Like Ian Roberts, Judge Stokes also lacks credentials. She did not even pass the bar. She does, however, sit on the board of an agency that offers second chances to criminals, or in the case of DeCarlos Brown, 14 chances. This proves once again that the identitarian left is a cult of death, prepared to sacrifice all not made in the image of their dark gods. These facts destroy the leftist narrative of blacks as innocent victims of ongoing structural oppression and of whites as selfish bigots whose every success is a theft of hope from a more deserving minority or marginalized group. They correct the willful misperceptions by woke ideologues about black violent crime and the disparate and presumably unjust incarceration rates of blacks in the U.S., which incidentally soared under the Clinton administration, not under Trump, under whom more blacks have been employed than under Obama. By the end of Bill Clinton's presidency in 2001, federal prison populations had grown by 60%, with blacks comprising fully half of inmates, despite being only 13% of the overall population. The largest inmate group was disproportionately black men. Under Obama, SNAP enrollments hit an all-time high, climbing from 32 million in 2009 to a record 47 million in 2013. Obama waived work requirements for welfare in 29 states, leading to sustained dependency on government support, and food stamp enrollment grew 75 times faster than job creation for black Americans. Conversely, under Trump's first term, black unemployment had dropped to a record low of 5.4%, down from 7.5% when he took office. This marked the longest streak of job growth on record and narrowed the gap between white and black employment to its lowest ever. By the end of Trump's first term, median weekly earnings for black workers had risen nearly 11%, and poverty rates for black households fell to their lowest since record-keeping began in 1959. These facts give the lie to the professed concern with immigrants' rights, which apparently matter much less if they entered the U.S. legally and are white and working to pay their own way. It seems BLM and Ukrainian flags can't be waved at the same time. One hand needs to be free to point the finger or receive the reparations. The media blackout, or was it a whiteout, on the excruciatingly sad and lonesome death of Iryna Zarutska was an example of the mandatory disavowal of reality that lies at the core of the critical social justice narrative. It is a loyalty oath in reverse, which is how the American left operate, through opposition and negation. Woke is supposed to mean awake to injustice, but like the fable, crying wolf to game the system for social credits has left half the country hearing crickets when it comes to genuine suffering. It has also made it indelibly clear who the true sadists are. Freud called this propensity to cruelty a manifestation of thanatos, the death drive. The American left is a death cult, and they are bearing down on us like a locomotive. Guess who's driving? Buckle up.